In our modern Western civilization, we take no little pride in our technology, in our knowledge and ability to manipulate the material world, and in all that we've achieved in the sciences. In other words, we think we're pretty smart. Some are so proud of this, in fact, that if you get them on a roll, they'll start waxing philosophic by opining something like, people weren't like that in the past. They were all ignorant and unscientific. They thought things like the sun was a god. Pretty crazy, huh? And they continue. We know, of course, that the sun is really a massive amount of superheated hydrogen and helium along with other elements and gases, and that's all. The problem with this fairly typical cultural analysis of the past is that it is wrong on two counts. First, the vast majority of people in cultures who had a sun god did not think the sun itself was their god, but rather that the sun was a visible manifestation of their god, a god who remained unseen. The sun pointed to, was a sign of, signified their god, if you will. You see, people in the past were not the simpletons we've been told they are. Second, the sun is not just a huge rotating ball of hydrogen and helium gases. It's more than that. It has significance beyond its chemical composition, beyond how it works, and beyond its usefulness to us. The ancients were right. It does indeed point to something. Their mistake was that many of them, not all, but many of them, thought that each of the various elemental powers pointed to a separate God, when in fact they all point to a single something, a single someone, in fact, the one true God that you and I worship and love. But this mistake of the ancients is a small one compared to ours. For they got the big picture, namely the main point of the divine lesson that things, events, and actions signify something beyond themselves, whether for good or ill. They point to a reality more real than they themselves are, if you will. Yes, things, events, and actions have meaning in themselves in the moment, but they also have a deeper meaning. They testify to a higher reality. They can have eternal significance. A mother changing a diaper, a father teaching his son to fix the car or to hunt, and hundreds of other things parents do, all have meaning in the moment. But they also point to something deeper. They testify to a higher reality of love of the mother and the father for their children. A love that transcends the bounds of time and space and points to an eternal truth. We moderns have dismissed the transcendent and the eternal for the immediate and the present. Our culture has produced people who see someone pointing at a sunset, and instead of looking at what they're pointing at, they go and stare at the finger rather than the beautiful sunset that they're pointing to. And after a long and excruciating study of the finger, during which they miss the sunset entirely, they pathetically conclude that the digit is rather ordinary, merely a collection of nerves, veins, bloods, arteries, and joints all wrapped up in skin. So who's made the bigger mistake? We moderns or the ancients? Who's to be pitied and who's to be envied? Even as Christians, we can similarly forget that the grace of the present moment is important precisely because what it points to has eternal significance. In the Old Testament, God often used the material and the temporal to point to the transcendent and the eternal. The heavens declare the glory of God. In the Gospels, Jesus often confounded his contemporaries as well as his adversaries by emphasizing the eternal and the transcendent. When the paralyzed man was lowered through the roof to Jesus, our Lord was compelled to heal him twice. First, he forgave his sins, thereby healing his soul. Only after those there failed to recognize the greater miracle did he perform a lesser one, the healing of the man's body. Both body and soul have significance. We believe in the resurrection of the body, after all, but it's a both and, not an either or. There is a hierarchy. The eternal is indeed more important than the temporal. But even so, when we sanctify the present through acts of love, even a world fixated on the temporal and the material take notice. Catholics testify, signify, and are living signs that should point to the eternal by what we do in the present. Among these signs are the corporal and spiritual works of mercy. Among them are the Beatitudes. And after a time, the world, if we practice these as we should, will stop merely looking at the signs themselves and start looking at what they're pointing to, namely, the eternal and transcendent God who inspired them. When St. Therese, the little flower, enjoins us to do little things with great love, that's what she's talking about. When St. Elizabeth of the Trinity said, quote, "May my life be a continual prayer, a long act of love," unquote, that is what she's talking about. St. Raphael Kalinowski, a Carmelite priest, puts it more bluntly. He said, quote, "What a pity it is. Though we are on earth simply to prepare for heaven, we hardly ever speak of it. How we waste our lives and our energies," unquote. Advent is the perfect time to reprioritize, to reorder our lives so that we give priority to the eternal and stop wasting our lives on that which does not matter. We do this both for love of God and love of neighbor. For there are many who only live in the present and have no hope and even despair of the future. Our lives must be a sign for them. Our lives are no longer our own. We have been bought with a price. St. Raphael Kalinowski summed it up perfectly when he said, "We are not here for trifling things. We are here for God."